Welcome to this week's episode of Everyday Thin Places. I'm Rachel Gallagher, and I'm an interfaith hospice chaplain.
And I'm Elizabeth Verasso, and I'm a birth doula.
And in each episode of Everyday Thin Places, we draw from our experiences supporting birthing people and dying people to explore with honesty, authenticity, and humor how we can all become more truly living people. We are back this week with part 2 of a really special interview that we got to do. So if you haven't listened to last week's episode yet, you might want to go back and listen to part 1 of our interview with Noah Hepler from Queer Eye.
We just had so much to talk about with him. There was no way that we could manage cutting the conversation short as we were having it. And then once it was recorded, we didn't want to keep any of this great conversation from our listeners. So you heard us talk last week about Noah's experience with Thin Places and his job. But of course, we pretty quickly got into his experience with Queer Eye. So we will talk more in this episode about what it has been like for Noah and what it's been like for his church with the aftermath of Queer Eye in the pandemic. And I think you're really going to appreciate the wisdom, the perspective, and just the delight of hearing this conversation with Noah Hepler.
And so God is the beginning of the relationship. God is the end of the relationship and the middle. And if we see God as somebody who is active and changing, and I think subversive is a great word for how God operates in the world, in a way that leads towards love and justice and peace and mercy. If those are the characteristics of God, I think that will change how we treat one another. If that's showing up in these little moments in our lives, what we might in this context call this queer eye moments. Queer eye in the sense of in those moments, we get that prophetic imagination, that prophetic vision of maybe how God is interacting in the world, and we hold on to that. That can change things for us and those around us because it becomes practices of love of God and love of neighbor. Mm-hmm. I think that's where real transformation is found.
Yeah.
The theology of Queer Eye.
God's own Queer Eye, yeah.
Somebody needs to write that book.
I nominate Noah.
I gotta finish my dissertation.
I think that's so beautiful, and I want to just go back and watch your episode a third time because I'm just reflecting on how it all weaves together and how there was so much healing for you, how you were able to extend grace to yourself. I think of each of the Fab Five and kind of how they came about a deeper understanding of what it means to be the church. I loved the moment where you got to look at Bobby in the eyes and apologize for the ways that he's been hurt by the church. I think that's so needed and necessary. There has been so much hurt done in the name of Jesus, in the name of God, in the name of the church that has nothing to do with Jesus or God or the church. So yeah, there's just, your episode just goes so deep for everyone involved. So if we have any listeners who haven't seen it yet.
I think that when we do the intro, we're going to just tell people to go watch the episode before you come listen to this episode, because we are going to spoil away. We're not holding back at all.
That moment really was, I hope, for the church, a takeaway for it.
Yeah.
I don't remember if it was the transition into that. Maybe there was they do this transition title cards with quotes throughout the show, and I don't even know if I'd mentioned Brene Brown or not, but I love her work on vulnerability, healthy vulnerability as a strength. And they used her quote. And I was kind of blown away by that when I saw it for the first time, because for me, that really was, that kind of experience was what was central for me coming out of that. And it was clear that the team saw that too, and what quotes they picked, and especially that one from her. And my hope is that the church as a whole would see that and embrace that, because right now the temptation is, as it ever has been, but it's pretty strong right now, when we feel like we're in decline, and I know, like, statistically we are. I don't actually doubt that church membership is declining. I do frequently question what that means, because I don't always think it means what they tell us it means. That could be a whole podcast in and of itself, so I won't go too far into that. But the temptation in the face of those kind of statistics is, we've got to get back to the position that we were in, which is somewhat mythical, of when we were at the center of everything. And I get that. As somebody who grew up in the South, like, yeah, Sunday morning is still a thing about church. You don't have marathons that shut down the city on Sunday morning. They might be Sunday afternoon, more likely Saturday, but not Sunday morning, because people got to get into downtown to get to church. And so I get that, but there's a temptation there to cling onto something that's more about power than witness. And we need to let that go, because I think what I hope people see in that, what church people see in that moment with Bobby is that we as a church need to let go of those narratives that tell us that we can't admit to making mistakes. That if we want to be seen as powerful and strong, we need to always be perfect. Especially for Lutherans, that's not our story at all in the pulpit. Why do we as an institution keep wanting to play that out? There was an interview that, which is a Philly Voice. I don't remember which.
That they did on your episode, that they did about your episode? I think it was Philly Voice. I remember.
They interviewed Bobby also.
Yes. We're definitely going to link that in our show notes. So
there was that interview from here in Philly where they got a hold of Bobby, and they asked him about that scene. And I think he's right. I'm not really the person who needs to be making that apology. Queer pastors are not the ones who need to be apologizing for how the church has treated queer people. Yeah. And I think by extension, it's not black pastors who need to do the legwork for how the church has not shown up for race relations. They're not the ones who need to do the bulk of the work on exposing how the church was complicit in undergirding slavery, that we can admit that we did that. And the only way that we're really going to change is if we begin to admit there were and are times far too often when the church is complicit in harming people. Or the one that I think it's too easy to forget about. It is not female pastors who need to be doing the work about justifying their existence, and that's the kind of thing that I think we may have to engage in, and it's not going to be comfortable. And it certainly might look like a loss when compared to very specific narratives about power and strength and success that actually don't match our message to begin with. The opposite for Lutherans, the opposite of the theology of the cross is the theology of glory. And I think too often those are moments when we are trying to embrace that glory, which is really about ourselves and not about God. My experience after the show is that what people are responding to are those moments that were theology of the cross in that story. And in everybody else's stories, not just mine, but in all the seasons, what people are responding to are those theology of the cross moments, not the glorious moments. And I think there's a real lesson for the church as an institution to learn from that. And I hope it does.
So might we say that vulnerability is a thin place?
Yes.
Those times that we can be vulnerable, that we open to a sense of power coming from a source bigger than ourselves.
Right.
Yeah.
I think of a thin space as always a place that's risky. There's always a lot at stake in a way that it's not at other times. And so, vulnerability is what happens in a thin space, I think. You risk presence with other people, with, birth and death, those are moments of presence that are loaded with vulnerabilities. And that's what makes them powerful and beautiful and life-changing. Thin places, I think, really is what life is about.
We think so too.
I would imagine. Vulnerable moments as thin spaces, I think it dawns on me that kind of those traditions, that the thin spaces, because the veil between the world has become vulnerable. That's what makes those spaces powerful. And I think when we give up those narratives that keep pulling us to look for places of power and strength, we actually lose the track to find where actual strength is, which is in the vulnerable places of our life. So beyond just what the church could learn, I think as a whole, that's where we all could learn what this can mean. There was an old Sojourner magazine article that the author was writing about Queer Eye and how the Fab Five in their shows mimic the gifts of the Spirit. And that resonates with my experience with them. And I think what we'll find is that if we give up on pursuits of power and instead look for pursuit of healthy vulnerability of thin spaces, we'll find those same kind of fruits being born by the Spirit in those spaces.
Yeah. My personal favorite fruit of the Spirit is kindness. I like them all, but I like kindness. And I love to think about how kindness and vulnerability go hand in hand. That kindness creates that space that evokes vulnerability. And from that, like you said, you get all of the other loving your neighbor comes out of that. You have the capacity to show kindness out of a sense of being loved and accepted for who you really are. And, for you as a spiritual leader, your power to help people or to gather people into your congregation becomes one of a power of attraction, a power of here's a safe place. I just love, we don't usually I usually reserve Queer Eye to be just my own thing to watch, but because my kids know who you are, we let them watch that episode. And my oldest daughter, just laying on the couch with her and watching the show together, and realizing how beautiful it is to think of her and other people her age versus me at her age, who just feel like, well, of course we have queer leaders in the church. Of course we have queer congregants on either side of us. Of course we do. Why wouldn't we? To her, it was almost kind of silly that like you wouldn't, because she's growing up and she's asked me many times, at least a dozen times, Mom, when the pandemic's over, can we please go visit Pastor Noah's church? And so that vulnerability and that creation of a safe place that you being willing to be vulnerable on such a huge platform is creating a space that is so powerful for people who need all the good that will come out of their life from being able to enter into those safe places and feeling like they can belong in the church, even if I think for us growing up, that was not present.
Yeah, that's, thank you for that, because that was really our hope. There was a lot of discussion about whether or not we ought to, as a church, do we need to be on a TV show? There was that kind of question. It really came down to the question of the opportunity to witness. As one member reminded me, it was that week before, one of those last Sundays in Lent, where the gospel text was about the people who come to Jesus and they say Pilate executed a bunch of people and mixed their blood with their offering. And apparently, in the wider context, that was seen as some sort of judgment against the people. And Jesus says, basically, God does not work that way. But when the tower at Siloam fell, were they somehow greater sinners than everyone else? No, God doesn't work that way. And I said in the sermon, I said, we hear a lot of Christians who have a much broader literal broadcast reach than we do, who raise questions like when the hurricane hits, who caused that, who made God so mad that God would slam a hurricane into a city? And it's usually gays, right? So, and I said, here we have Jesus in the Bible saying God doesn't work that way. And it's just too bad that we don't ever have that broadcast reach.
Here you go. Silver platter.
And then so, as another parishioner said, be more specific about what you pray for. And so here we are, and we made it to Queer Eye. We got that broadcast reach. And we are, as a community, really hoping. We're not perfect. Atonement is wonderfully crazy, but we're full of flawed people, including myself. There are moments where we don't get it right. Those moments happen way more often than any of us wish that they did. But we are hoping that we're a space where the struggle to be better is genuine and in progress. And I think that's the real witness, that's the real grace, that we're all cracked clay jars that are seeking healing, and that this is a community where that healing can happen. And so I think atonement is a genuine place. Even as a pastor, I just constantly find that amazing to see happening. And so, yeah, I'm glad to hear that came through, and I'm constantly thankful to the Queer Eye team and how they handled our story, because I think we had no conversation with them about that, but I think they sensed it on their own and really brought that through.
So I think that Elizabeth touched on something that many of us are probably curious about, sharing that her daughter has been begging to visit your church. I have to say, I live in the neighborhood of your church, and when I watched the episode, I got really excited about that fact. And I'm sure, the expectation was this is going to go out into the world, and then people are going to know about this church, and, what a great impact this will have. But it came at a time when churches were not able to open their doors and welcome people for services, and no one saw that coming. And so could you share a little bit about, what has it been like in the year after you filmed the episode, but also, especially since it has aired, how has Queer Eye sharing your story impacted the church today?
It's weird. The way that COVID has changed the pace of our lives, this feels strange coming out of my mouth, but it's almost been helpful. I mean, of course, I don't want a pandemic, but we're such a small community. Again, I'll go back to saying I don't think we had a real sense of the scope of how big the impact would be. And so there are things that we then have more time to figure out with a little more of an idea of how big it was. And I know, it can lose steam by the time we get to wherever, and that's fine. And there are many ways that I just trust this is playing out the way that it needs to. Mm-hmm. So the impact has been 100% through social media. Media in general, because there's been interviews, right? So, and podcasts, all kinds of things. So it's paced it in a way that for a community that's so small, I think they're able to begin to figure it out a little more before perhaps the effect of it actually comes to the front door. Mm-hmm. So right now it's just through, Instagram, Facebook are kind of carrying the bulk of that for us. And mostly right now through the handfuls of direct communication that we're able to do. Because if you go to our social media sites, they're not as active as you might think they would be on the surface. It's that direct communication where I've really seen most of it. I thought there would be a lot, but I thought I'd eventually be able to keep up. That's not true. I can't keep up with it. It seems like every time I answer one, I get 10 more. And they've all been positive. It's just the volume is difficult to respond to things, a little easier to get them read. So we're taking this time to kind of retool ourselves to approach things differently. Because honestly, I had plenty of ideas when things were quote unquote normal, and then COVID really threw all of that out the window, and so we spent most of this time doing a variety of things. One is trying to figure out how to redo all of that. Actually, how to redo what our community was before Queer Eye was even a thing on our radar. Because that was the first thing I needed to figure out is how do we continue as a community? And that hasn't been perfect in and of itself. It's just quite a struggle, but a good one. In that it for us has raised questions about who are we and how do we do what we do. And then also kind of more behind the scenes, like the congregation itself, again, small, yet has been directly impacted by COVID. One of my housemates got sick from COVID, was hospitalized, so we spent a good 2 weeks in some pretty intense quarantine, and then members of the congregation have been sick, and some of them had died. So we have been having to deal internally with the effects of COVID, and that has, I think, rightfully diminished some of our larger response. And there's just other illnesses because everybody's stressed. I think a lot of us were stressed before COVID even became a thing. So now that's compounded. And so people are not necessarily with the coronavirus, but just with other stuff getting sick, because that's what stress does to people. And so we're still trying to get on our feet in some ways. However, we have gotten some work done on reimagining what does this Queer Eye experience look like for us. And we've got a couple of things in mind. We got to get the last few pieces put together. We did a test run with a Bible study online. We didn't advertise it, and the response to it was pretty big. We just did it as a test run, which we had to do it live. That was part of the test run. And to get the response that we did from something we didn't even advertise, let anybody know what was going on, I think for some of my members was kind of a big aha about actually how big is this, and also ideas about how we can move forward. We've got a couple of YouTube series up here right now, and we're hoping to get it out. Up here being in my head, which unless it gets out of my head, it never survives. I'm confident enough I can tease these a little bit for anyone who might be interested. So the house features prominently at the beginning of the show in not glamorous ways. It needs some help. And some of that had begun before COVID hit. COVID derailed a lot of that also. The one good thing that happened is the roof has been patched, and I no longer have a leak in my bedroom.
Good.
But some of the side effects of that leak are still there. The hole's still there, but it's been patched, so I don't have water. But we haven't been able to do the inside work yet. That is changing. That's coming up now. And so we want to do a series. I don't know if we're going to be able to call it this, but the name I've been kicking around is This Old Parish.
Nice.
Playing with This Old House. Where we'll look at, we'll kind of document the repair work that we're doing both on the church and in the parsonage, because there seemed to be some interest around that and what the rest of the story is going to be about that. I want to answer Karama's question of why does a pastor have a sword? Something that Atonement has not been good at, and I think this is a general Lutheran problem. We don't talk a whole lot about what we do, because I think it's born out of that emphasis on we want to talk about what God does, because it's what God does that gets us salvation, not just in the world to come, but the experience of salvation right now. And so we're really big about talking about what God does, so we don't talk about what we do. I want us to learn how to do that in good ways. And so we want to do a series that will cover the different ministries that are coming out of the congregation. 2 examples of those. One that you're familiar with, By My Side. We want to highlight By My Side and the work that they do in the community. And also, we have a small team of people, primarily led by one person, that through this pandemic has been providing 30 to 40 meals a week for women in a safe house, or at a safe house. And those are ways. A reason to highlight them is for people to become partners with us in those things, because I think those are spaces where people can become involved. They're both what one might call non-sectarian. That's not about being Lutheran to do it. It's just something that we're doing, and we always need team members. So that's something else we want to start doing, maybe with our YouTube channel, is highlighting that. So those are things that we've done and are preparing to do throughout the rest of the pandemic, and then on into the future too. Because I think the other thing that this has done for us is it gave us time to realize the social media presence will be part of Atonement's life from now on.
Yeah. I mean, I know in one of our former episodes that we did was about the wonder and amazement of closed Facebook groups. Rachel and I are both a part of some really active closed Facebook groups, and we have friends from around the world. And so I know that when Queer Eye Season 5 dropped, I have friends from around the world. We have a Saturday check-in in my one group where we're just like, hey, what's up? What's everybody doing? And I said in my group today, I said, I'm going to get to sit and talk with Pastor Noah from Season 1 of, or episode
Season 5,
episode 1 of Queer Eye. And, and these people are so excited for me to have this conversation because they're around the world and they are watching the show. Some of them are listening to the podcast too. We clearly do not have the same reach that Queer Eye does. Not yet.
Not yet.
And I think that's what's so amazing. Sort of the shakeup of the pandemic has been when we are forced to be virtual, we realize how rich and authentic and vulnerable, dare I say, that we can be vulnerable in virtual spaces, sometimes even in ways that we're not so good at in real, in the flesh interactions. And so I love that idea that you guys are pushing into more divine imagination in the way that you are thinking about virtually presenting yourself, because there are people, sure, one day when people can gather to worship on a Sunday morning more safely and they can fill in the seats at your sanctuary, we sure hope that there's going to be people there. But for the people that are never going to step foot in Philadelphia, I love that they're going to have a way to still follow the trajectory of growth and goodness that's coming out of the experience that you personally had and that your church had with being on Queer Eye.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I might be jumping the gun a little because I know that we gave you a heads up that we always ask this question. I don't know if you have something else in mind. I love a good plug for By My Side, an organization that I am always asking people to send money to because I love the work that the By My Side parenting group does. And you mentioned this other person who's preparing meals. Would you, is there anything else in addition to those two, or would you like to share any more details of those two endeavors that if our listeners wanted to be generous on your behalf, that we could point them in a direction that they could give to help support those causes?
Yeah, so both that feeding ministry and in many respects, a lot of By My Side is funded through Atonement's own general fund. By My Side operates its own budget independent of us, which is how they pay teachers and things like that. But the building maintenance, that kind of thing, frequently comes out of Atonement's fund. Atonement's general fund undergirds By My Side significantly. Although I think our most profound support for By My Side is the building space. So By My Side Neighborhood Parenting Group is, from what I've seen, a source of sanity for a lot of parents, especially first
I can
parents.
witness to that.
Yeah. It's a play group. It's a morning drop-off program. Their website is going to do a much better job of explaining it than I do. I call it. It's just such a beautiful thing for families who sometimes don't have access to extended family, to network, to work together to try to build a better, stronger, safer neighborhood. All kinds of, I think, friends of groups have come out of those network of people who have been part of By My Side. And I think it has a deep, lasting impact on the community. And again, it's one of those, so it's not a Christian daycare sort of thing. It's just its own thing, doing its own thing. And I say that because I think we've all had that experience of the creepy kind of setup where it was almost a bait and switch, and it's not that. You don't even get a discount if you're a member of Atonement. So part of that is because Terry, the director, one of her goals is to keep it accessible to everybody. So the costs are as low as she can get it. So if somebody wants to help out with that, I think she now has a Venmo. I think a lot of that's going to be on her website, which is...
We'll link all that.
Yeah, bymysideparenting.org, I believe. And then Atonement, all of those ministries also come out of our general fund, which is not huge. Atonement does what it does on about $60,000 a year, which is not a lot of money, considering that a chunk of that goes to paying utilities. So we're creative, and of course, the more financial partnership that we got with that, then the more that we'd be able to do. I'm not a good salesman for my son.
Yeah, that's okay. We'll do it on our behalf. I mean, give money to By My Side. Absolutely. Send some money to Atonement Lutheran that you will be helping to feed women in a safe house.
Right.
So some of the nuts and bolts of By My Side is that, they have to buy food for all the pets, because if you're a city kid and you don't get to see, birds and guinea pigs and bunnies, that it's part of the playgroup space is that there's birds and there are turtles and there are bunnies. Funny story, the bunnies actually came, my husband rescued the bunnies in West Philly. They were stray West Philly bunnies that now live at By My Side, but they need to eat. And so so we would love for our listeners to be generous. And I don't know that you have at any point asked people to give as a result of this Queer Eye experience, but I sure hope that there's going to be people who are going to listen to our little podcast because it's going to be tagged with having you as a guest. And if you share it on your Instagram, then the give back of that will be that you get this chance to say, let's thank Noah for his vulnerability, for his time, for the gift of all of your life as it was presented on Queer Eye, all the ways that it gave us hope, gave us inspiration, that some of that can come back to just simply have people send some money to go in your budget to help you do more of the good neighboring work that you do.
Yeah, that for me, it gets back to the YouTube projects. I mean, that's part of what we're hoping to show in those. And that will include, there are plenty of ways to partner with us. One of those, especially at a distance, would be through financial partnership. Food costs money, and they're creative about getting it, but, more food means more meals. And so, we want to tie that kind of giving to supporting these community, I call them community partnerships that Atonement has developed in a way of supporting other groups who are doing great work out there, and that's what we want to keep doing.
Well, you're doing great work.
Thank you.
I feel so fortunate that I had this connection to By My Side, which gave me a connection to you, which gave us the opportunity to have you as a guest this day. I mean, we just feel fortunate that Queer Eye picked Philly. Yeah. Because it showed off our city in such an amazing way. It turned out that, I think we knew people on 5 of the episodes.
Oh, wow.
And so I just feel so proud of our city being shown off. And we are you can't walk around Philly without stumbling on a thin space, a thin place. You can't watch the season of Queer Eye or any season of Queer Eye without feeling that sense of being connected to something much bigger than yourself. And so we're just really grateful for you spending this time with us so that we could connect our listeners to all the magic of your experience being on the show. So thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It's been amazing and a wonderful everyday thin place in itself.
Thanks for joining us. Now it's our turn to hear from you. So would you do us a big favor and go into your podcast app and rate us? Even better, would you write us a glowing review? That will help other listeners to find us. And make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss a single episode.
You can also visit our website at everydaythinplaces.com, where you will find all sorts of fun and interesting information, as well as learn about how you can help to support this podcast and earn special exclusive perks. There you will also find links to follow us on social media, or else just pop directly over to Instagram or Facebook, where you will find us at Everyday Thin Places. Thanks so much for joining us today. Until next time, I'm Elizabeth.
And I'm Rachel. Bye.